am going long because I never can tell. Sometimes I finish this in very fast and other times not. Let me know, okay?
How should we tell you, Lisa?
Say, hey, Lisa, you're going on a little long. You need to wrap this
Speed it
up.
up.
Yeah. And then I will jump to I'll just skip projects because I don't need to talk about everything.
Do you want me to, how about this? Do you want me to tell you when it's like 6:30 or something, which will be like 15-minute warning so you can gauge, or?
Oh, I won't be able to tell by that. Just
Okay.
go like 5 minutes and then I can just jump to the end. Like that's probably easier. 10 minutes, 10 minutes.
All right. So Emily, you want us to get started?
Yep.
All right. So, and I think others will join, as is often the case, but welcome to everyone to our lecture tonight. My name is Carl Dobman, and I'm the Dean of the College of Architecture and Design at LTU. Our lecture series celebrates really interesting people and designers who can speak about design, technology, and practice. And this is true of Lisa Iwamoto tonight. We also try and invite smart people that can speak to more than one degree. And because we offer a range of professional design degrees from graphic design, game design, industrial design, transportation design, interiors, and architecture. And I know that Lisa can speak about architecture and interiors and deals with issues of the city and mobility and all sorts of things design. And so what's interesting is that all of these design disciplines have undergone massive transformation and disruptions in the last few years related to technology. And so this is something that we think specifically about at LTU. And so Lisa Iwamoto joins us tonight. She's a founding partner of Iwamoto Scott Architecture, which she leads together with her partner, Craig Scott. And she can talk about a number of these things. Lisa's, as I alluded to, is really interesting, really smart, given the first couple of paragraphs, but she holds an undergraduate degree in structural engineering from the University of Colorado. And most architects, when they hear that, they sit up in their seat because she can do math as well as design. She holds an MArch with distinction from Harvard. She's a professor of architecture at Berkeley. And prior to moving to California, she had a connection to Michigan. She was the Muschenheim Fellow at the University of Michigan, and she taught there for a number of years, which is where I know her as a colleague from there. She is the author of Digital Fabrications, Architectural Material Techniques, published in 2009 by Princeton Architectural Press. I was going to say I thought maybe I'd offend her. I was going to say she's the godmother of digital fabrication. Not grandmother, godmother. But she's been working in this area and doing super interesting things. It's also amazing to track their work. I know we were talking before, and Martin and I know Lisa from a long time ago, and to witness the transformation of their practice from really thoughtful, small scale material investigations to some of the large scale projects that they're working on. Their firm has received numerous awards. I was going to say almost every design award that you could possibly imagine, from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian National Design Award. They are Interior Design Hall of Fame from 2018, Emerging Voices and Young Architects, both from the Architecture League, Design Vanguard from Arc Record, over 20, maybe more than 20 AIA Design Awards now, including a National Design Award, a PA Award, and many others. Their work's been published many, many places, and Craig and Lisa lecture all over the place. And the scale, maybe just to say or to share with Lisa, and maybe to share with some of the students who are joining tonight. I know that our ecological issues class is joining us tonight. And there's a project that I always reference of Lisa and Craig's that I can only find in one place because you haven't published it enough. And I think it's so incredible, which is the spiral chair. And it's a chair that they designed, which they water jet cut, and it's a spiral cut and it's zero waste. And the way that that goes from two-dimensional to three-dimensional is absolutely incredible. And I think it's that intellect and wisdom and design sense where you can go from something at the scale of a chair and that amount of rigor and thought, all the way from things. I'm sure Lisa will talk about some of the recent projects. They've done 3 headquarter projects for Pinterest, looking at interior and dealing with fabrication. There's some incredible houses that they've done, the Go-To House, which has been published in a lot of places. And now their work is continuing to scale up and to be built. And so it's really amazing to track Lisa's trajectory through all of these things. And it's really exciting to have her joining us tonight and to share that work and to be able to reconnect with her. So welcome, Lisa. I don't know, I guess we'll all do like a virtual clap, which is what we do these days, but welcome to the lecture, and thanks for sharing your work with us tonight. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I like especially that you brought up the spiral chair, because before the talk today, we were cleaning out our garage and we came across the spiral chair and we're like, oh my God, we got to bring this to the office. And it has very fond memories because of building it, but also because it was built in Michigan. And I'm really excited to be able to present to your community today because you do have architecture and you couple that with the other disciplines and interior design, which to me, architecture and interiors just want to go hand in hand, but they sometimes rarely do. And I don't normally get to talk to both audiences at once. And so pretty excited about that. Okay, so moving forward, let's see. I think I need to reduce this guy. And okay. So this is our office. This is pre-COVID, so we're all working remotely now, but I wanted to share it because I think it speaks about who we are. We're about 15 people, so relatively small, and we work in a really lateral manner, meaning everyone's a designer and someone who's working on a chair for 2 months or so might also be working on an urban plan for the next 3 months, and then might be working on interior after that. And so everyone is very heterogeneous in the way we work and bring a lot of ideas and talent, obviously, to the table. And so all the work I'm going to show is led by Craig and me, but could not be done in any tiny fraction without the amazing people that we have working with us. So as Carl mentioned, we do work across a number of scales. On the one hand, we have done, especially in the beginning of our practice, a number of small scale installations, which are an opportunity for us to look at materials and fabrication techniques at a one-to-one scale. And then in the middle are, I think, what we more think of as conventional commission design projects. And then at the far right end are speculations, which for us was like a great opportunity to explore processes like digital processes and other techniques that we weren't able to execute with our other work, and also look at scales that we aren't typically able to execute with our other work. And our practice kind of began on the two sides of this chart and has been moving towards the center in the last 8 to 10 years. And so our practice, which maybe it's always in a state of transition, but certainly is in a state of transition of getting more bricks and mortar work together. And so you're going to see, kind of some of that play out in the talk tonight. So I've rearranged the projects into a more select few and coupled them for some conceptual clarity, and then wanting to add in some of the things that we have more currently in construction and on the boards. So to begin with, just talking a little bit about the installations, which is that for us, this is an opportunity to think about thin materials through geometric processes, getting them to work in more unexpected ways. So for example, through folding to be able to look at structure in a new way, and also to create some perceptual performance out of them. We look to art practice too, in a couple of different ways. One, like with the Ava Hess here and the Anthony Gormley, just how does aggregation of materials combine to produce something more than the sum of its parts? And on the other hand, this is Tara Donovan styrofoam cups. And this is a actually just like a wind shade made out of tires as a ballast, but how to look at ordinary materials and use the kind of necessity of the everyday to make something unexpected. And I think for us, we try to think about how to innovate, but we like to innovate within constraints. We're not really looking to invent something totally new. And so we really look to things which are kind of at our fingertips and how to rethink those for our projects. And we had been working this top set of projects in this laminated wood material. We've been working on projects how to use this very, very thin, kind of paper thin material structurally. And so the first project is just our largest exploration of that, which is the voussoir cloud. And this was an installation that we did at SciArc in Los Angeles for the gallery. And the attitude here began much like all of our material projects, which is by model building. That's the one thing I really miss from remote work is the kind of physicality, I think, of our work. But while we love digital processes, we like analog processes more, I would say. And what we discover there is just the materials can do things that you wouldn't, that can surprise you. So this very thin wood material, for example, and we were interested in folding along a curved seam, had a lot of resistance to that idea because it wants to work with the grain too. And so we were working with this like natural product and trying to make it work geometrically so that it could be self-supporting. The conceptual driver for the project was really to couple two different structural paradigms. Carl mentioned that I have a structural engineering background. I was actually a terrible structural engineer. And only through architecture and designing did the intuitive side start to come out, I suppose. But what we were interested in here is how to take the idea of this pure compressive structure, which is the arch, and couple it with the pure tensile structure, which is the catenary. So in other words, how can we turn this literally upside down and have the thinnest material possible be able to span? And then incorporating digital techniques to be able to do that and be able to predict load paths, for example, which would also shape design. So for example, where load paths get thicker, so does the packing of the material itself. And so this is a photograph of the installation from above. This is at the SciArc Gallery, so it's really nice because you get to have this catwalk up above, and so it's experienced not only from within, but also from without. And it was important for us to use up the whole extent of the gallery. We're less interested in objects, I suppose, as a practice, and more interested in space. And so really thinking about how this could be a kind of new hypostyle hall. This was done in 2008. So I feel like, we've seen a lot of research in this arena. When we were doing it, we were fumbling around in the dark. We didn't have Grasshopper really even at the time. And so just trying to develop new scripts and things that would allow this to happen. And what was important to us was that learning curve, but also the learning curve of the way the material was perceived. So that sometimes it's very luminous, for example, because it is incredibly thin, but other times it starts to feel more solid and evoke the idea of that arch and the stacked blocks. And then just zooming in, the qualities of when one does fold along a curve, the ability to get the modules to scallop. And that's not really a function at all of weight, although it does look like it's about the weight of the structure above, but really more a function of the local curvature. And for us, that was exciting because it had a tactility to it close up, as well as the perception of it more at a distance. And then that project and the idea of using folding as a structural device for thin materials, we deployed here at the parking garage. So this stuff in the foreground is not ours. This at the time, this was done by Shop Architects, was the largest 3D printed structure. But I'm talking about the building in the background, which is a facade for a parking garage and a small building adjacent. So the idea here for us was how to create a mural I suppose, is the best way of describing it, on the exterior of the building. One that didn't speak to panelization so much, but more about the effects of the overall. And so what was really important, we thought, and I think we still think, to make that happen is to not feel like the panels are beholden to or held hostage by the structure behind. So I think what one often finds, and you can maybe see that through the perforated material next to us, which was done by an artist, but is that what we normally see are like a bunch of verticals, because verticals are what hold up panels. And in this quick mock-up, which was built by Zahner Metals, is that you do see the verticals coming through. And what we wanted to look at was trying to eliminate those. And so the skin itself had to become structural through folding, meaning that the verticals became an offset grid rather than a continuous grid. And the central panels then, so this is showing that offset grid cantilevered from the underside of slab, and it also cantilevers from the slab floor. But the intermediate panels then become structural and need to carry the wind load of the building. And so what we could get from that was just the kind of qualities of the overall. You'll notice too that there's a couple different colors. Those colors relate to the porosity of the panel, and that was designed to fulfill the mechanical requirements of the building, because we needed a certain amount of airflow to have natural ventilation. But the coding of the colors in our Rhino model, we were showing it in one presentation to the client, and they were like, we love those colors. And so it was funny because it was kind of like just through the process of color coding them so we could keep track of what was what and calculate our percentages correctly, actually became part of the design. And the other aspect of these panels is that they change when one moves around them. And so it's not really a static experience, but more of a dynamic experience. Sometimes, looking more like fabric, sometimes feeling more two-dimensional, other times more three-dimensional. And then it also reflects the colors of the sky and the clouds. And so the colors themselves are also changing quite a bit over the course of the day. And then more recently, like last year, we completed another parking garage for the University of San Francisco, which is the medical campus of the University of California system. And very, very different. The building was given to us. With the Miami garage, that building was built at the same time we were building the facade. This parking garage actually had a facade on it, and there were these glass channels. They're not that visible, but they're actually quite beautiful translucent glass channels and then solar panels on one side. But the glass channels kept on cracking and falling, which wasn't good. And so they removed them all with because they were so fearful that it could hurt somebody. And so the garage stayed in this state for like 15 years. Which was that it had these horizontal rails that used to hold the glass channels and the solar panels. And that was it. And so the Chase Center, which is the home of the Golden State Warriors basketball team, was being built across the street. And they approached UCSF and said, we do not want to look at your unfinished garage across the street, and can't you do something about that? And so they held a limited design competition for a very, very small budget. So for example, the building right behind us is the Neurosciences Center. That was a $400 million project, and our project was $1 million, just relatively speaking. But can't you do something to this facade so that we don't have to look at just the parking deck? So because this was UCSF and they do a lot of medical research and wanted something which would speak to their brand, we translated the idea of DNA sequencing and also just the simple helical of the DNA strand and abstracted that quite a bit as a series of panel types that could then be arranged in different ways across the facade. So we ended up with like kind of 12 basic panel types, which were each folded. They were either flat or folded at 2 different degrees. And then by mixing and matching them, we could get actually quite a variety from the strands themselves. So just like DNA, using a set of smaller parts to create a lot of variety. And then for the building itself, those kind of come in packs of about 20 that repeat across the facade. So the repetition isn't really that visible, but it is there for just having an economy of means. This is the mock-up, this is the exterior of our office, and just the mock-up about how big those panels actually are. But also we were excited that because of the angles, even though they were pretty subtle, reflected light really, really differently. And so it looks like a multicolored facade, even though it's actually not. It's just simple white anodized aluminum. This is an image of it installed. And then across the street from the buildings next to the Chase Center. And, it's not just the panels themselves, again, which is quite variegated, but also we feel like the negative spaces in between that start to speak to that DNA strand. And so, of course, we want some abstraction. We don't want it to be literally, like I think down the street, this is a light rail stop, but down the street at the light rail stop is a literal DNA spiral. And, where at first maybe clients are interested in something that overt, it was very much our intention to try to pull it away from that and have it become more architectural in nature. And then it does really serve as a backdrop. This is the plaza in front of the Warriors Arena. And this is a kind of grandstand, which is there for other public performances and things that happen out in front. And so it becomes this, backdrop for all the activities that happen. If you guys know Steph Curry, that's him. And then in terms of the building and interiors projects, we have similar ideas. In other words, we try to think about materials in a way which is very tangible and perceptually rich. But at the same time, we also, of course, as we change scales, we need to think about different things. And so here, what I'm showing, and I think Carl might remember this from our Michigan days, but my partner Craig has been obsessed with this idea of the double negative. The double negative is the name actually of a Michael Heizer earthwork piece. But the idea of it is that, and it can happen at multiple scales. We have it at the scale of a sculpture, we have it at the scale of the house, the Bonaventure house, or the Alvaro Siza building. But the idea that two voids can come together to create a more complex intersection, which is greater than, again, the sum of its parts. And so while we're looking at material and we're looking at experience, we're also looking at form and how form can create space. So the first project I wanted to talk about is Pinterest headquarters. And let's see, I just want to think. I'm going fine with time, right, Carl? Because I'm at the beginning still. But this is a project which is within an existing building. So when you're working in San Francisco, you're working a lot with adaptive reuse, meaning taking a building that used to be one thing, and this used to be a John Deere factory, a John Deere storage facility, and turning it into another. And that new thing is the tech headquarters. So we're working very much in the constraints of the building. And the biggest constraint for this building is that it was very, very light challenged. It's in a long block, so there's another building here with a tiny little light well cut out on both sides. It has windows on the front and the back. And at some point, I think in the 1980s, they put in a skylight that cut through the building just to the second floor. And so this is a really big footprint of a building, and tech companies really love large floor plates because there's a lot of cross communication and collaboration that happens. But it didn't work as well with the building that only had light coming in on two sides. So our first step was to cut a new hole to bring the light well, the existing light well, down to the first level. And our next step, maybe counterintuitively, was to fill it up, but to fill it up with a stair that essentially became the heart of the building, and could be in a way seen as a lantern in the space, as well as a means of communication. And then the stair really drives the flow of the space. So, when we think about interiors, we of course think about materials and palettes, but what we think about first is the flow and the form of the space and how that functions. And so there's two paths here, one that wraps around for kind of the public and a front kind of cafe space, what they call the all hands, which is a large dining area. There's a whole servery, and then an employee entrance, which cuts through the existing elevator bank and kind of wraps the other way. And so the stair becomes that pivot point around which people are circulating either clockwise or counterclockwise. And then there's another element, which is this diagrid waffle that kind of is what we call our takeover moment of the front. Interestingly, when Pinterest first moved into this building, they actually didn't occupy 100% of it. They only occupied about 75% of it, but they did own the lobby, and they wanted it to be perceived that they did have the whole building. And so we included an element which would get that reading across. So this is a view of the lobby piece, and the ceiling really absorbs a bunch of the stuff. So if you've been to any building, there's a bunch of crap in the ceiling. There's the ductwork and the sprinklers and so on, and acoustics. And one of our mantras for this project was like no acoustical ceiling tile, which is like just the pervasive material in all the tech offices that you see here in San Francisco, and really across the country. And so we want to get acoustic performance without having actual acoustics. So there's sprayed up acoustics above this, but you don't really see it. And then all the other stuff kind of is hidden within the cells. And then as one moves into the space, it's that kind of front lounge and barista. We also worked on some very, very simple custom designed furniture that we had built. Everything's on casters, so all the stuff can move around and actually can allow for the all hands space, which is a space where they use also as an auditorium, as well as their dining space, to extend out into that front cafe portion. And then in the distance here, starting to see the stair and how the stair becomes a focal point for this ground floor. And in addition, we just did smaller things too, like thought about how to integrate lighting into the edges of the space so that it would feel light and bright, even though, again, space is very buried within the concrete walls of the building. So the stair itself is obviously the main means of communication. It's overscaled. But the idea of it is that it, again, becomes this kind of sculptural object within, and there's embedded LED lights, and so that it reflects the sun in certain ways in the daytime, but it also can emit light at night. And then around it are other, again, designed some furniture pieces. This is basically a servery island. There's a large bifold door that can close out the kitchen or open it up. But at lunch hour, there's 1,000 people tracking through here all around at the same time. And so space needs to be very broad and allow for people to really move through very fluidly. And then the stair is also a visual lens across floors. And so, the tech industry in California started down in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is like an edge city, kind of, meaning the buildings are huge and they're like 1 or 2 stories. And that's been the ethos of the tech industry in terms of the kinds of buildings that they're looking for. And so for us, or for Pinterest, they made a commitment to being in San Francisco, which I think is an amazing commitment because, the people who work there wanted to live in the city. We're going to have to see what happens post-COVID. But in any case, moving across a floor level is a perceptual challenge. Like, people don't want to do that. They want to move horizontally and not vertically. And so the stair is, it's like triple scaled. It's really large, but it also allows for these visual apertures to happen through. And then from one level to another. And then around also are things like the game lounge and just, moving through. The stair is actually hung from the second floor. And then there's a platform that absorbs some other program, which is not just your blind man's rail, meaning so you don't hit your head when the stair gets too shallow, but also a place for seating and eating. So just moving around the stair. And this is it kind of in full swing at lunchtime. And then it does have an Easter egg, meaning there is a hidden concept for the stair, which is that it takes the idea of knitting. So knitting is a key principle of Pinterest. And it takes the idea of the crossing of the needles to create something with the crossing of the 2 legs of the stair. At the intersection is our double negative moment. And so this describes the stair from above and the atrium, which again, we painted but did not really design so much. But the double negative is another small volumetric element inside the stair that allows for one to view from one side of the stair to the other. So the two legs of the stair are intersecting, a self-intersecting stair that creates a prism, which is a negative from the bottom and a positive from the top. And then it emerges, the stair emerges kind of like this animal almost on the second floor, where we have a series of meeting room boxes. So again, trying to use volume as a way of controlling acoustics, meaning that the quieter workspaces out to the perimeter where we have limited light, but people sitting there all day want the most access to that natural light. And then a series of meeting rooms that, again, volumetrically become kind of like a porous a threshold between the social center and the quieter workspace. And then we used color as a kind of natural wayfinding element through curtains that would create privacy for the meeting rooms. And they just kind of happen in different ways throughout the building. And then the meeting room volumes themselves take on different configurations. And at the intersection of them, we created our glass corner so that one could look from open space to open space or from meeting room to meeting room. And the idea there was that, again, it's about the horizontal expanse, letting light leak through from the perimeter to the center, but also the idea that, this generation of tech workers have, FOMO, they have the fear of missing out, and they want to know what's going on, and they don't want to feel isolated. And so this is just a way of adding for visual connectivity across the whole floor plate. And then the second Pinterest headquarters, which started in design before the first headquarters was finished. So when we started with Pinterest, they were about 200 people. And we interviewed like a quarter of the company, 50 people, before we designed the first headquarters. By the time we got to the second headquarters, they were pushing up to 1,000 people. So in the span of those 18 months, they'd grown fivefold, and now they're, double that again, or more than double that again. So it's not like we really had lessons learned from the first project, but there was an aesthetic shift, because I don't know if you guys have ever been on Pinterest, but it really at one point was like a crafts site. And we were able to work directly with Evan Sharp, who's one of the founders of Pinterest, and he had an architecture background. And what was really cool about working with him is he just understood architecture, because he went to Columbia, and he didn't finish the program there because he founded Pinterest, but really understood architectural concepts. And one of the things that he said about Pinterest is that we needed to ease people away, he felt, from the idea that Pinterest was just a crafts site. And it was really more a site about building inspiration. And so it was about being creative, not craftsy. In the first headquarters, however, you saw that we used rough plywood and things like that. We left, much of the building was left raw, and that was for budgetary as well as aesthetic reasons. But, that was kind of one step further removed from just the craftiness. But then they wanted this building, which was their second headquarters, where the founders were moving into, to be one step away from the building that you just saw. And this is the building that was being designed and in construction at the same time as the interior. So we were kind of chasing the building up as it went. So part of the constraints of this building, a good constraint, is that this is actually a public space. And in San Francisco, large developments need to have what's called a privately owned public outdoor space, or a POPOS. And this is the POPOS for this building. And so anyone could come in here, and to Pinterest's credit, they wanted this to not just be their lobby, but really be a place where anyone from the neighborhood could come in and be a resource for the neighborhood, and decided to run a cafe out of it. And so they developed a whole cafe strategy called The Point, and made food in the basement, which is where we have the full service kitchen. And people come here from the neighborhood. I mean, now during COVID, it's a lot quieter, but people come here all the time. And so, kind of taking the idea of our initial idea of that flexible furniture, evolving it here, different textures, different materials, but still highly reconfigurable, so that the whole POPOS can be open, or that they can use it for events also. And so the cafe is really part of the lobby, just really defined through a material change of the tile and the color. And then this is the actual reception here. And then the other element which sneaks out into the lobby is, again, the stair. So, I just showed you the stair of the HQ1. And that's a stair that was kind of grand and large from level 1 to level 2, and they kind of narrowed down from levels 2 to 4. But this is a 6-story building with a much tighter floor plate. And then, so the stair became even more important to overcome the idea of traveling vertically through and having the floor plate be a spatial divider. And the idea here was that it's predominantly a cascade stair, so a single run that cuts kind of like a knife through the whole building. But the building isn't long enough to have an entire cascade stair. And so the idea was that it could switch back at the point of the public lobby. And so while this is all public, being in the stair is actually when you are in Pinterest. And so moving into the space, there's this kind of internal street, as well as the beginning of the stair. And the street cuts all the way through the block. This is coming in from the front side. And we still do things like develop full-scale mock-ups. For example, this is a ceiling made out of insect screen, which it serves as our acoustic as well as our light baffle. And so wanting to do things like that and fitting them in smaller ways, so our installation work is still present in the design, and trying to get more 3-dimensionality out of 2-dimensional materials, which is like our predominant concern when looking about installations. And then this is a street from the alley side of the site, which is actually a very well-trafficked alley because their Pinterest HQ1 is like a block and a half down. So most people take the alley to get through to this side. So the stair cuts up to the second level, which is their all-hands space. This is a much lower floor-to-floor height, but relatively clean ceilings. And our work really had to do with trying to minimize or maximize the height and minimize the depth of what we needed to put in there. And so using acoustics as this is an acoustical material, but cutting it in a certain way, again, zero waste, except for a tiny little extra cut where we developed some custom light fixtures together with Pinnacle, which then project off and become objects in the space as well. And then just a series of booths, wanting just a variety of seating postures in the space, even though it could transform again to their kind of large auditorium once a week. And the stair continues up, again, cantilevering over or hanging over the privately owned public space, and then continues up. And so there's kind of the wrapping around and cutting all the way through the body of the building. And the idea for the stair too is that it was volumetric and not just like a stair with a guardrail. And so our volumetric enclosure serves as the guardrail, but it actually serves to help define the stair as a whole element in the space. Initially, it was plywood actually, and before it was very clear to us that they wanted actually a move away from that craftiness and more towards refined aesthetic. But it also, so we have a series of steel rods, 5/8 inch steel rods, but this also ended up working a lot better because there's a lot of deflection in the building, floor to floor. We're in earthquake territory on landfill. So the rods are actually quite flexible and can flex when the building flexes. And then just coming up with, a very simple corner detail with an integrated door so that it's not like just a bunch of doors in the wall, but really more, again, like celebrating the corner, celebrating the volumetric quality, even though it's a very, very, again, narrow floor plate. And then building into that, these kind of smaller nooks where people could work and meet. And then looking back down the stair, just, really seeing that transparency where you can look all the way down to the street, even when you're here on the 6th floor. And then, in addition to office space, we also do residential. And I just want to show this project really, really quickly. And then I want to show the Goto house. This is your typical San Francisco condition, which is you have really cute buildings and little Victorians, which, populate a vast amount of area in the city. And people don't really want that to change. This was a very unusual site because there was just like a little building in the back, and this was a vacant lot. And so the neighbors on either side and across the street really liked the vacant lot because in San Francisco, if it was like that when you moved in, that's how you want it to be forever and all time. there's actually a huge resistance to change of the urban environment. Nonetheless, the owner, who was actually an owner developer, so this was a spec house, it was not built for a client who lived in it, but built to sell, wanted to build a building here. And there's just a series of requirements that have to do with bay windows. So if there's bay windows here, you want a bay window. The house can only be set back half the distance from the front one to the back one and whatnot. And our solution to all of that was just actually taking the living room and rotating it to create a complementary light wall to the existing light wall, which is mandated by the city. If your neighbor has a light wall, you need an equal and opposite light wall. It also created the bay window, or our version of the bay window, as well as a space for the entry. And so again, we're super interested in constraints and just trying to figure out what all the limitations are, and then thinking about that really hard and trying to figure out, okay, what is our design solution around that? Like, what are the fewest moves that we can do to accomplish the most tasks in a way? And so here you see that rotated volume, and then wanting to celebrate that with thinking about how, a light fixture. And so taking the rotated volume with a rotated light fixture was actually normal to the room. And then in the other rooms, which are perpendicular to the street, just using something much simpler. And so this is the living room. For the interior designers on the call, this was a stager. We did not pick this particular set of furniture to go together, and definitely not that painting. But anyway, just a nice, airy, light room. And then the space itself is quite open, with a slightly sunken level to get to the backyard. Really simple, a cantilevered stair. And again, that project at twilight. And then the project I wanted to spend a little more time on for the residential is the Goto residence. So very unlike working in an urban environment, this project was sited in the Napa County. So not Napa Valley, not the wine region, but the kind of more rustic region of the area, which is adjacent to a really beautiful large lake named Lake Berryessa. And so the project itself is sited on 95 acres, and not all 95 acres is that traversable. There are some really small kind of like ATV tracks through there, and then a primary road which we had to build up to the project site. But in this huge 95-acre parcel, there was really only a pretty small area that was really buildable. That said, it's an incredible site. It's up on a kind of bluff almost. It overlooks the lake and has just beautiful views. So obviously, kind of the most majestic view, I guess, is out over the lake, but each view is really exciting, different. Some are quieter and calmer. Some you're just looking, more towards the mountains. Other ones just, feel a little bit more intimate. And so our goal was to celebrate that and try to think about how to capitalize on the views looking in each direction. So the client initially, said he wanted kind of like this pure glass box, and we did do a scheme like that. But we also proposed another option, which was this, kind of hexagonal form, which was a little bit different when we first started, but, resulted into this kind of asymmetrical hexagon, again, to celebrate the 360 nature of the site and the views. The other thing that's really particular about this project is it's actually 100% off the grid. So it gets no city water, no city electricity, no nothing. And so together with the house, we built a garage, and for the kinds of equipment that the owner would need to maintain the site and also have fun on the site, like the ATVs and whatnot. But the garage kind of became a battery for the house. So it has the solar panels, it has water tanks behind it, and then it's trenched to the house to be able to supply the house with the solar energy and the water that it needs. And then there's this small, very small, like kind of terrace and pool. So the conception of the house is, again, that asymmetrical hexagon, but not a pure hexagon, but one that has a rhombus center. Interestingly, when we looked at the Miami garage again, it was the same thing. We had a 6-sided figure going to a 4-sided figure in the center. And so I feel like we're looking at scales, but just like in a really different way in this house. But we wanted the house to be not just purely extroverted, but also be able to be quiet and introverted at the same time. And then the next step was sloping the roof so that it could actually catch water. It's not that big, but not the water that does land on the roof goes to an inner drain that can help feed that cistern. And then it's also cantilevered up from the ground. Initially, the house was actually on piers, but the structural engineer later informed us that the ground was so unstable. It was like what they call heaving soils. And so the solution was rather that the house would be more like a boat on the water and have a mat foundation. And so then it was like a big mat foundation. And that wasn't really what we wanted either, because it wasn't supposed to feel heavy. It was supposed to feel kind of light. And so the solution to that was to have this kind of cantilevered base that allowed it to lift up off the ground. And then the last step was carving in a series of outdoor porches for the rooms that would have views in the different directions around the site. And so that kind of describes the exterior of the building. And so at first, I think from the exterior, it seems highly asymmetrical. But in fact, it's just a series of 4 rectangular rooms. And that geometric difference is taken up by the outdoor porches. And so each room, again, has like either a viewing porch or a sitting porch. And the porch itself is what kind of angles out, wedges out to the views. And then one of them is the entry. And then the circulation is around the central rhombus courtyard. So pretty simple in nature, but again, kind of like a series of rings, the most exterior to the kind of central courtyard, central circulation to the central courtyard. So this describes a project built, more recently finished. Now it has more growth, in some of the surrounding areas. But looking at it, just kind of moving around the building, there's a large corner window, so the whole inside can open up to the outside. And the owner really wanted a sturdy project because it's our second home, and so they're not there a lot, and a project that wouldn't invite in. There's a lot of critters and animals in this zone, as well as fire, of course. And so the lifting up off the ground served that functional purpose of keeping those things out, as well as allowing for the building to appear to float on the landscape and be both connected, but also in a way a little bit divorced. So just moving around the building and then different kind of cuts that the porches create from the exterior. And then just kind of moving in more towards the entry. The stair has a kind of an equal and opposite cantilever, so it's actually not touching the house, but meeting the house. And then moving in to the interior when it's first met by that courtyard. So pretty simple. Again, a really clean prism, but again, a quiet moment in the body of the house. And then at the apex or the termination of each of the hallways is the door that leads out to the porch. And so one of the things that I enjoy about the house as it was getting built is just how different the different views are as one moves around through each of those apertures. And then in the back, the prism turns into this kind of solid volume. And this is actually where all the solar and all the equipment and the control panels and the washer and dryer and a lot of the functions for the house are. And so this is actually a closet with just concealed doors. And so just looking out to the porches, and these are 2 different porches. And so just the quality of those different porches and how it changes throughout the day, and also just the different kind of views one gets when looking outside. And then on the interior, quite simple. I think our work was mainly in making things go away. And so having the refrigerator go away and the appliances be able to be covered up, and just having just really clean edges to this space. Again, so they could kind of shut it down and open it up when they wanted to. And we were really lucky because, like when you're designing a bigger building, typically we work with lighting designers. So when I mentioned that we were working with Pinnacle on the lighting, we had a lighting designer too. Like it wasn't just us trying to negotiate with the manufacturer. The lighting designer came up with a lot of stuff. Like we might pick the decoratives, but they're doing a lot of the architectural lighting and also helping us with decoratives. It's a very it's a very large project team. For a house, an architect typically does the lighting too. And we happen to be very lucky because our client was an electrical engineer who worked for Apple. And so he spec'd all the fixtures, which is pretty unusual for your client to do. But what we did is we came up with, again, integrated lighting in such a way that we could use just really simple plywood materials, but just carve it out a little bit, because this is a sloped ceiling and these pieces are flat to the floor. But being able to just put in like a little tiny LED light there to allow the ceiling to glow at night. And then also to reinforce, for example, the edges of the courtyard and have the lighting reinforce the geometry of the building as a whole. And so looking out to the, to the lake and to the view. And at night, and then using the light, light in the same way, which is to articulate the exterior volumes as well as the interior courtyard. And then just moving up in scale.
So Lisa, you're approaching an hour.
Oh my God. Crap. You know what? We're not going to talk about this building. And
I was afraid you were going to do that.
And we're not going to talk about this building either. This one is like really close to our house. Is what I like to talk about. But I do want to talk about these last two projects. So thank you, Carl. That was perfect. Yeah, I feel particularly chatty today. I don't know why. I think it's because I have this diverse audience. But anyway, so back about, let's see, we're in April now. Yeah, like a little over a year ago, we were invited to submit for a project in Columbus, Indiana. It's for Ivy Tech Community College, which is, they have nursing and health sciences and surge tech and business and visual communications and graphic design. I mean, they just have like this huge range of really great programs and train essential workers in computers and computer science and all that kind of stuff. But the exciting thing, that was exciting, but the other exciting thing was we really want to do an educational building. So that was super exciting. And the other exciting thing was that it was in Columbus, Indiana. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with Columbus, Indiana, but it's like this mecca of modern architecture started by the Cummins diesel engine company, who started a foundation to have architects over, the past 60 something years produce modern architecture for the city. You can literally go into Walgreens. Like I got a cold there and I was buying some cold medication. This happened right before COVID. So we only got a couple site visits out there, but like I ended up having like a 20-minute talk with a cashier about all the good buildings in the city. And you could do that with anybody in the town. So it's a very, architecturally rich community. These are just some pictures that we took on some of our site visits. So projects by Saarinen and Roche and Venturi, just like a lot of different people. But what inspired us about it was, that, but also just the attention to detail, and it did span across scales, and that was something that really spoke to us. So the site for the building is on what's called the Air Park campus, and called the Air Park campus because it's close to a local airport. And this is the town of Columbus highlighted, and then downtown is like right here. So north of downtown. Zooming in a little bit, this is what the Air Park campus itself, and zooming in a little bit more to get a little bit better picture. So now the airport is just to the north, but this is the Columbus Learning Center. This is Indiana University and Purdue shared this building, which is a library, and this is an advanced manufacturing center that all these colleges share. And this is the Ivy Tech building, which is an existing building. And what was interesting about this project is they were doing a replacement building. So the idea is that everything in this building needed to go into this building, and it could not be 1 square foot different than this building. But all the programs were changing sizes. And so it like became this huge puzzle. But anyway, so the idea was that, the building would fit here, and ended up being bigger than this, but the building would complete the quad. So whereas their old building, if I go back one, just you could be wandering around this building for like 3 days and not realize there was a shared quad here. But the new building would be right on the quad, and has a little bit of new parking in front. And then what they were interested in was having this kind of grand gateway where someone could, and this is the main central avenue, but a car coming in could look through to the shared quad, providing identity to the campus. So we went out for this informational interview, and Craig and I were both sick actually, but Craig was more sick than me. So he was just like sitting there. He just like, poor guy, he was like totally miserable. But anyway, so we're talking about the project and, walking through the old building, we have, these are the general ed classrooms and blah, 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 and things they liked and didn't like. And at the very end, Craig, who rallies, says, so are you expecting anything for the this is just like our preliminary site visit. And they had all 5 architects come out for a site visit, one day each a week. We happened to be there on the Monday, and the other architects were there on the remaining of each day for the remainder of the week. So Craig asked that question, like, so for the interview, because we were supposed to go back, this was right before Thanksgiving, and we were supposed to go back the week after Thanksgiving. So we had, including Thanksgiving, like 2.5 weeks. Craig says, are you guys expecting some design thoughts on the campus when we come back for the interview? Because it was not written down in the request for proposals. And they go, yes, absolutely. So, we try to play it cool and go, oh, okay. So we go back to our office. Now it's Tuesday and everyone's taking off Wednesday because it's Thanksgiving. So we just mentioned, hey, when we get back from Thanksgiving, we're going to crank out some designs because we have a week and a half to do that. So this is what we came up with. So none of these things are getting built, but this is what our team did. All those people you saw on that second slide, this is what everyone did in the remaining 10 days. Anywho, so when we won the project, we're super excited about that. And when we started diving in, wanting to work more with the realities of the site. So we really did those 3 other schemes just to show the way we work and how we think, which we translated here, but the building looks entirely different. So the way it looks different is, first of all, we got the budget. So we didn't know a budget prior, and it's an incredibly constrained budget. And that shaped a lot of what we wanted to do. And so the contractor was on board already, and basically said it should just be a rectangle. So we said, okay. So it started as a rectangle. But what we did is we kind of carved out this spine because we did want from the parking side to be able to see through the building to the quad side, and then rotated it because we also wanted to address that grand campus gateway and the view from Central Avenue. And so the space in between became the social programs, and all their other programs are fit in on 2 levels. This is a community room. But the idea is that all the social programs kind of occupy this zone, and all the academic programs occupy the rest of the space on the 1st and the 2nd floor. And so again, just the 1st and the 2nd floor. And then for our internal street, we had a series of all these sculptural skylights that got value engineered out, meaning it was too expensive. And so we came up with a solution of having just 3 very simple clerestory lights, kind of like a factory, but facing 3 different directions so that you could register the time of day in that space. And so this is what a rendering of what the building currently looks like. And just I'm going to track around really quickly to the facades, which just have, just like subtle moves to start to break apart a little bit more. And this is the quad side. And taking that rotated language from that lower volume and translating it up here and connecting the spine, again, back to the quad. And this is the glassy student commons. And then just, a little bit more in 3 dimensions, but also wanting to use a very typical Indiana brick, white brick, but corbelling it just to begin to, again, use a more or less two-dimensional material and create some three-dimensionality out of it at some specific windows across the building as a whole. And then this is just moving in at reception, purposefully low, compressed, moving out into the social spine where, we start to see down into the academic wings, as well as down the social spine to the quad. So having, again, that quad view right when you enter. And this is the community room, and this is the student commons. And looking back the other way, a cascade stair, which was actually one of the ideas that we had in those 3 very, very early studies we did for them before the interview, but a cascade stair that has a series of study nooks, and then looking back down, and the clerestory lighting above. And so we also looked at, just again, color as a wayfinding device for each of the corridors. But I think what I want to show and would show better is a quick animation through. So I'm going to turn that down a little bit. So the rotated volume also creates a covered entry for us, as well as rotating. So it's more visible from that grand entry on Central. And then moving into reception. This is the aviation, so they have an aviation control room because they do teach how to fly, and they use the airport campus. And moving down the spine. Community room on the left, this is express enrollment, and the student commons. Really simple idea of, shared tables, a cloud of light fixtures, and then that's out to the quad. Using exposed ceilings in almost all places except for the spine itself. And then moving up the cascade stair. And then they have really good visual communications, visual art there, and they own the whole RAND collection, which is an incredible graphic design collection. And so that's obviously going to be on display. And then moving down into some of the academic corridors. And so it's kind of, these are Ivy Tech secondary brand colors. Actually, their primary color is green. And their secondary colors are the oranges and yellows. And on the other side, it's the blues and greens. So again, a very simple way for us to kind of provide an intuitive navigation device for the city. And then a really simple, just linear light fixture to accentuate the corridor. And then when you get to the classrooms, volumes, there's kind of like white niches. And then there's a second story study, kind of shared collaboration area that again overlooks the quad, which is that indent on the quad side. Overlooking the student commons. There's going to be a makerspace in classrooms. And then at the very end of the hall here, so there's actually another little sneaky stair that brings one back down to the common, so it's a closed loop. And then there's a very small terrace for some of the events, which overlooks the Columbus Learning Center, as well as the quad. Moving outside to look at some of the brick detail, and that northern facade again. Okay, and then this is the site as it stands today, so it's in demo, and we should be moving in Q2 of next year. They should be moving in Q2 of next year. Okay, I have one more project, and I really apologize, I'm kind of going over, but I'll make it really, really fast. So on the speculative side of our work, some of these were competitions, but many of them were commissioned by institutions for us to look at futuristic ideas. So, that would include like the Jellyfish House or Edgar Street Towers. We had City of the Future and whatnot. You can ignore that phone. But it's interesting that, none of these obviously got built, and there was never any intention that they would get built. But one of the projects, the Jellyfish House, which we designed in 2006, was brought to the attention of a developer who wanted actually a futuristic exhibition pavilion, and thought, well, why don't we just have these guys do this, this Jellyfish House, which we were terrified because it's we never designed it to be buildable, really, But anyway, so this is the project for the Chengdu Future Science and Technology Town Exhibition Pavilion. So in the news recently has been OMA and GMP won the design to do this whole town as part of Chengdu. And our project is a tiny little speck, much smaller than my little star here, but a tiny, tiny speck to the north, which is an exhibition pavilion for this town. It's gonna be the first building built because it's like the sales center in a way, or the publicity arm of the town. On one side, kind of to the northwest, is a huge new international airport, which is currently under construction. To the south, obviously, is a technology town. And then to the west is this beautiful river park, which is very identifiable and important to the town of Chengdu. And so where they were interested in having, this is just a close-up showing those three adjacencies. And our project is the exhibition pavilion and a small observation tower. But where they were very interested in first at having the jellyfish house, our way of getting around that in a way, or moving the client away from just wanting that particular building done 14 years later, was because this is a three-directional scheme, not a two-directional scheme like the jellyfish house. And so the idea for the pavilion is it has major views out to the park, the new town, and the airport. And then the observation pavilion is rotated 60 degrees so that its views are the complements of an exhibition pavilion. There were also, incidentally, just 3 protected trees in this entire knoll that they wanted to keep. And so to avoid that. And so the idea is these kind of like 3 overlapping triangles, essentially, which has an opposing triangle in the middle, which becomes a courtyard to the space. So just really fast in terms of the diagrams, cutting a courtyard through the middle, which of course deals with the humid climate, and the courtyard is so important to the kind of cultural heritage of the architectural typology of the space, lifting it up for the views, the rotation of that top triangle, and then lofting between the outer edges in that middle triangle. Both the top is occupiable as well as the balconies along the edges. And I think I'm going to skip over these diagrams because you'll see that a little bit more later. But the idea here is that there's a large kind of grand stair underneath this, what we call the crystal. And so the crystal is actually outdoor space and becomes a breathable element. It has operable windows and it's going to have hanging landscape in it. And the bleacher stairs connect one from the site level up through to the exhibition level. Just in terms of some of the material systems, there is glass and then panelization, which has a different kind of porosity and openness to let light in. And then underneath the solid panels are solid elements. And so just what some of that lifting looks like. And this is the top observation terrace. And again, lifting also at the edges, not really so much for view, but actually for ventilation. And so some views from the larger site and from below, from the park. And then there's a breezeway which cuts through the building. And also there's an amphitheater, which, this is, one can move from the breezeway all the way through to the another like kind of grade level terrace, or through the building and spill back down through this outdoor amphitheater. So this is the breezeway here, moving through into the amphitheater, and then coming up to the second floor exhibition level. This is a view of the amphitheater, the terrace, and coming up to the breezeway, moving into the breezeway, into the interior, which is kind of lined with some of these more smaller moments for people to just basically take a breath. They said there can be up to 10,000 people here on a weekend. And so you can imagine that our, very sparsely populated building will actually have a lot of people in it and be really packed sometimes. And people just need those little small moments of escape. The crystal, which again is an outdoor courtyard element, and it has an exterior stair that wraps up around the outside and then in to get to that top level. And then through and to the top. So I just want to show quickly, this is from the freeway. And then one last animation just to describe that experience a little bit more fully. So this broke ground this week for the whole site. So it's, the building is part of that project, but the schedule in China is incredible. It was so compressed. When I asked initially for like 12 weeks for design development, which to me seems really normal, they're like, okay, we can give you 4. And we're like, okay. And then, we turned in our design development drawings just like 3 weeks ago. And within 2 weeks, they had a 50% CD set for us to review. So just when you think about COVID and how they built that hospital in a week, that's actually not that abnormal that is normal. And so in one of our more recent meetings, because we're working with an executive architect there, I was like, so when are we starting construction? They're like, oh, 2 weeks from today. So it actually broke ground this week. So the crystal, in addition to being this exterior courtyard, is actually also display surface with embedded LED mesh, and that becomes a technological element in the building. And it is interactive as well. And the ceiling is this additional layer, which is illuminated from above, but also has more specific exhibition lighting, which cuts through. And then the exterior glass on the balconies also becomes an exhibition surface. I mean, this is the stair. And so trying to embed, there's gonna be a lot of exhibitions in this space, but our goal was to not have a lot of additional walls. And so to have the exhibition space really be for objects and to have the walls be able to, perform for the vertical surfaces. And then the idea too is that, while this is highly technological, it's also really intimately connected to the landscape of Chengdu, which has this series of rolling hills, but also the light. And so the light is changing throughout the day, and those apertures at the ceiling really allow for someone inside to register the afternoon versus the morning and so on. This is the hardest moment of the whole project, is getting enough headroom right there, by the way. And so one circulates outside of the crystal and then moves through a door outside into the crystal itself. And so now one is exterior and can move upstairs and go upstairs for the final observation deck. And then, because the lights, which are integrated again between the outer skin and that inner mesh, there's an entire structural grid shell there, but will be RGB, and so opportunity to obviously, have a whole array of different kinds of light shows and respond to the seasons and so on. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
It's not that we want you to stop, Lisa.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you. There we go.
It's great. There's probably questions that will come from a number of different sources, either people real time in the chat, and then I think we're also on YouTube. So there may be some questions that come from YouTube. But I think, it's amazing just to see the work. And I think there's I don't know, always, I think maybe as a discipline, we struggle with the scale in the way that the work can be so intimate and tied to material. And then as the scale gets bigger, it seems like some of those things go away. But it was really exciting to see in some of the interior projects that you were doing, like the insect screen in that space, right? Which is part lighting, part fabrication. I can imagine you guys involved. And so I think I was struck by the way you started in the introduction and the kind of spectrum of work and the spectrum of scales. But I also it made me think that maybe less of a line, it seems like it's more of a loop, in that the material and small scale explorations, the digital learning that happens with those is maybe not so different than some of the large scale speculations, and that they kind of come together, but then it seems to move around. And so there's a really incredible relationship between those. So I think it's so great to see.
Thanks for saying it's a loop, because I do feel like, the small projects take as long as the big projects, right? It's just, they're no less work. They're just at a different scale.
Right. And then even like computationally, where you might have a Grasshopper script for a small furniture piece, you might be able to deploy a similar algorithm at a large scale and work and play with those in a different way.
Absolutely. We actually have some projects like that, but already went over. So there's a couple good questions in the chat. One is, in China, are you worried about the impact that reduced timing has on the quality of execution? Yes. but we don't know what that is yet. You know, like I have to say that our so any international architect working in China works with what's called an LDI, or local design institute, who will do the construction documents. That is just period. That's just the way it's done. And what we get to do is review the documents. We've already reviewed, as I mentioned, because in 2 weeks we had the 50% set to review, and I have to say they were really good. But but a good CD set is still different from a good building. So I'm just, yeah, I'm very anxious to see. I will say that compared to the US, I feel like contractors in China are much more open to trying something new, using digital fabrication. Like it's just more integrated into their whole into the construction. I mean, I think it was much more integrated now here too. But when we first started doing digital fabrication, like you would say you want to see something CNC cut from a contractor, and they were like, what? No, I'm not doing that, which is why we were building stuff for ourselves in the beginning, because it's like, okay, well, you won't do it, I'll do it. But now, of course, it's more enmeshed. And then the second question is, what softwares does your firm typically use? Yes, we do use Rhino and Grasshopper. We use Revit too, obviously, and AutoCAD. And those are the primary ones, actually. Same stuff you guys use. Because, we hire people and they're coming from schools like yours, and we're using what you're using. That's our goal.
Seamless.
Yeah.
I was wondering, could you maybe speak about, and like with your practice and you guys owning a practice, how much of your work, everything you showed was amazing and the design caliber was so high. And are you guys developed enough to the point where, like, some firms, they have like their bread and butter, their architect of record on other projects. So do you have anything that, sometimes it just has to be in the door and out, that you don't get to spend like that much time or that much money on? No?
I'm going to say we're underdeveloped enough that we don't do any of that.
Okay.
So we're 15 people, right? And I think sometimes I talk to friends and colleagues, and they're like, they've, because neither Craig nor I are business oriented. Like, we've never had a business plan. We've never had a strategic, I mean, we probably should, but we never have. And we're both teachers, all that kind of stuff. So sometimes I sit down with people who are way more successful than we are and I don't mean like designers, even just in any business. Their way of thinking is like, well, obviously the next step is to go bigger, And I think it's maybe difficult for them to understand, because sometimes I think, should we just get bigger? But then we have purposefully kept ourselves at this size because we don't want to need to get work to feed the engine of more people. Period. So we'd rather stay the size we are. And then when we do get slow, like, so for example, I was going to show that kind of 1 million square foot building that I flashed through really quickly. That's a core and shell project, but it was going to be Pinterest headquarters, and they had a lease on it and everything. That project died because of COVID in September last year. So we had a team that was on that was like, oh, okay. But fortunately, we got this crazy project in Chengdu, with a crazy schedule that everyone could just like jump on. But if, let's say, we hadn't gotten that, I think we would have done things like build models, of projects we never got a chance to do, and like reconceive like what I've been wanting to do for freaking ever is like reconceive our projects representationally, which like now, like, the representation is kind of like whatever, like that's what we showed the client, and it goes into the thing, and we haven't had a chance to like take a breath. So I think we would do that rather than like lay those people off only to hire more people later, or you know what I mean? That's just the way it's been. I don't really see us changing too much, honestly, from that, because it's just not our interest to grow in a way that doesn't sustain just doing the kind of work we want to do. And the other half of that, I'm going to say, is that, I mean, we turn down projects, obviously, but But sometimes there's just like the tiniest glimmer, like, oh, this is a really small project and you have no money, but you're really cool and you want something cool, and okay, we're just going to do it. And we definitely have some projects like that. Like we have some public artwork that we're doing, and it's like bleeding money, you know, but the thing is that we're just going to do it anyway, because that's what we want to do. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's refreshing to hear a firm that's just not like money driven and, you know, like billable hours.
We don't want to be in the poorhouse. You know, Craig and I spent the first 10 years of our practice like making zero money, right? But we were teaching, which was great. Now we're like an actual viable business, and you know, everyone has healthcare and a 401k plan, and we're making a profit, but I think people want to work with us because of the kind of work that they think that they can do, you know, and that's something we want to hire people like that. So, yeah. That was a good question, though.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Well, it was amazing to talk to you
Usually
guys.
once we get them started, then there's lots and lots and lots of questions.
I just have a comment. I'm really intrigued how you're able to still add some dimension to the square building, even if the contractor wanted a box. I'm like, oh my goodness, like you were really able to pull something out of it. Like you gave me square, but you added a lot of dimensions to it. And I'm really impressed by that.
Thank you. Yeah, so the Ivy Tech was such an interesting process. That's the other thing we like about projects, by the way, is projects that allow us to learn something new. So we're not the kind of firm that's like, now that we've done it once, we want to do it 17 more times because it'll be so efficient and easy. We're the opposite. We're like, oh, we haven't never done that before. Let's try to get that thing. You know what I mean? But Ivy Tech was particularly interesting during the process because it was a public project, meaning it was bonded by the state, and it's a you know, Ivy Tech Community College is a nonprofit institution which gets money, you know, from the state, and that's how they were building their building. So they could not be like, I'm used to tech clients where it's like, okay, you're a certain percentage over in construction, but the owner really wants it and they're just going to do it anyway. This is not that. This was like, we could not be 1 square foot different, nor could we be $1 over the budget. And there was no wiggle room there. And so, it was really a lesson in how to keep things that we felt were important and absolutely salient to the project, and letting go of other things. And so, but also being strategic about it. So not like building something that you knew from the get-go was going to be expensive and just to only get thrown, you know, like stripped out later. Like that's why we asked the contractor in the beginning, like, what's the least expensive material we can use? And he was like, brick. And we're like, okay, we're going to use brick. But we're using white brick, which is like 4 cents more per brick. You know what I mean? So now we need to get that 4 cents out of somewhere, you know? So yeah. And then at one point during the VE process, the contractor wrote a list of like value and, you know, what they call target value design options. And he's like, remove all skylights, remove the rotated box and just make it a rectangle again. And yeah, that was very intense, that period of time. I don't but anyway, so, you know, it was heartbreaking. And we just had to really convince the client, who was very convincible because it was a really good idea. Like, well, you know, you have, you know, it's like, these are things which are unavoidable. You have a fat building because your building can only be so wide because it's on the quad, and it can't be any wider because you have your old building right there and it's going to run into it. So it can only be this wide, meaning it has to be this deep, meaning it's very fat, meaning you don't get any light in the middle. So, you know, you got to get light in the middle, and you just it's spelled out and they're like, oh yeah, of course we have to get light in the middle. And then like, you wanted a grand entry. Are you really saying, you know, when you put your rectangle there facing the quad, you don't get your grand entry because there's nothing acknowledging that you're coming in off the diagonal from the street. So we just want to rotate this one box. And they're like, oh, okay. So once the client's on board with like, these things are important to us too, then you start getting creative, including the contractor, about other solutions for how to find those costs elsewhere. So we had like way more corbelling initially, you know, and we're like, do we really need it all? You know, a lot of these windows are just like to the facilities room, and does it need to go there? Or can it just go to these major classrooms and like these major programs? And, you know, and there were many things that were stripped out of the design, but I have to say nothing that was heartbreaking for us. And sometimes it improved the design in a weird way, in a really weird way. Like sometimes like really forcing yourself to know what matters can even help improve the project. And so, I don't know if this is like a huge improvement, but I would say that we had this much more complex ceiling and skylights and stuff in that central spine before. But I really love the way it ended up as just like really, really 3 simple clerestory lights, and that just feels right for the building.
There's a nice maybe way, or actually what I hope is that students take away from what you shared is there's a really incredible thoughtfulness related to the constraints. And at one point you even talked about the constraints, and you guys are incredible architects because being creative isn't in opposition to any of those constraints. And there was like one detail that I spotted in the stair that was going up in the second headquarters, where it's the skin traces a really clean line, but the stair obviously is like stair landing, right? And you guys just navigate and mitigate between those two conditions so seamlessly in all the projects.
Oh my God, you nailed it. So what I didn't mention is that we were, you know, because the building was going into construction, the base building contractor's like, where's the damn hole? If you want us to put the hole for the stair, you know, what does it look like? And we knew, you know, there was a budget too. And we're like, put the most boring stair you can think of right there with a regular hole, and we are going to make a thing over it. So it is the most simple metal pan stair, concrete fill. It is like the most boring stair in the world, but we wrapped it, you know, just.
Right. And maybe that's the moment where it comes back to like and I was also thinking, like, there was an article years ago that when you were doing a digital fabrication class at Berkeley from JAE, like you had these projects in these staircases too. And so it's like being able to find those moments, like architecturally or infrastructurally, like cut the hole, put the stair in, and then there's a kind of finesse or a kind of filigree that comes with another layer and another kind of way of thinking with that. And maybe that's I think we all struggle with, how do we bring the intensity of digital fabrication into something that happens at a larger architectural scale?
Mm-hmm. There's another really good question, which is, how do you initiate the speculative work? Is it all from your own interest, or how do you engage with potential clients for this work? We've done a couple open competitions. So again, like when our times are a little slower and we have extra people or people who don't, you know, aren't assigned to a project, that's the perfect time to do a competition. And we'll try to do a competition where we can like, show like in the future, like we've done a museum because here it is, the design, even though it's even though we'd love to do it, we've never done one. But most of the speculative work was actually commissioned by museums, or like nonprofit groups, and paid like, I don't know, a tiny little bit, but paid a stipend to come up with a set of ideas. Or like the City of the Future was it was actually a Discovery Channel like initiative, and they were doing cities of the future around the country, and San Francisco was one, and we were like one of, I think it was 5 architecture firms included. So we don't generate any of it, I'm going to say. We've been fortunate to be included in things that allow us to do it. And then, you just have to swallow that pill, which is like, you are going to spend so much more time on it, than you're paid for, and everyone's going to be exhausted at the end and whatever. And you just have to weigh if that's worth it to you to do, which, usually it is.
It's nice you can laugh about it.
Exactly.
question. How has COVID changed your business model? Are you guys working from home? What does that look like from a collaborative standpoint? And do you think that it's going to change things going forward for your practice?
So we, yeah, we're all remote. We've been remote since March. I forget what it was last year. We had at 1 p.m. our mayor announced that we were closed. Everyone had to not go back to their offices at midnight that night. So, everyone just like grabbed computers and quickly set up a, VPN so I was really worried. But we started to put some things in place which we never had in the office. So the office really ran like a studio, meaning, people were working on their projects and we're all in this big room together. And so definitely the translation from project to project is much more informal and it's like osmosis. You just know what people are working at because of osmosis. What we did really the day after we all went home, we decided we're just going to have a daily sync. So every morning at 9, everyone's on the call and it looks kind of like this, except, it's early in the morning, so we don't always show our cameras. But anyway, so, and we just go through all the projects. We don't show them, but it's like, who's doing what. It's just setting up who's doing what for the day. And, we're only 15 people, so everyone fits on the grid. And everyone's on time, which is like in physical space, no one is on time, like literally no one. But in virtual space, everyone seems to be on time. Everyone's on time. We're all there. And, every project's obviously a set of teams. So they have, I don't do this, but they have like someone, like one of the our designers like flashed her screen on and she had like 6 chats there with like different people in the office. And so they are chatting constantly. I don't really do that. I don't chat with them so much, but we have a lot of Zoom meetings in the day, a lot. I'm like not off Zoom for more than maybe 15 minutes here or there in the day between client meetings and OACs and, virtual site visits and inter-team meetings. We're meeting a lot. I would say that, and I haven't sensed a decline in productivity. I think we're equally productive. So it's not that, but I do feel like, I guess one of the main differences is like we used to talk a lot with our hands, like to like kind of point at the screen, like, and now we're sketching in Zoom, but things aren't translated quite the same. So maybe some things are fast. Managerial wise, things are maybe even faster, more efficient, but design wise, obviously, there's more iteration. You need it's just more iterations, which puts stress on everybody because like it just takes more time. And then going back to the office, we did a survey because, we're sensing that we're going to be going back sometime in the summer. And so, we have our little Google sheet and I asked everyone to fill out like, would you like to continue to work at home a day or 2 a week? 100% yes. Every single person wanted to. So we're going to do that. We already have every other Friday off anyway. So we work 9 hours a day because that's how much you work anyway. Let's face it, no one leaves on time. So as a way to like kind of work with that, we're like, okay, we're going to work 9 hours a day, but every other Friday you have off. So every other Friday is already a 3-day weekend. And it just makes sense that in, the other weeks, we'll probably work Monday and Fridays from home, something like that. Happy hours will be on Thursday instead of Friday. I think it'll be great. Actually, I think it'll be good. Yeah. Okay. A question is, with your learnings and constraint-driven creativity, how do you plan to leverage your experience to build your business or promote for the greater good? And then a follow-up to that, to build on that. Oh no, this is a different thing. Okay, so how do we want to promote for the greater good? I mean, that's a really good question. I think that's been at the top of everyone's minds for at least a year, maybe. If it hasn't been before, it probably should have been before. But it's definitely at the top of our minds now. I feel like I don't have a good answer right now. I think the thing I am trying to do is build a good office culture, which it hasn't always been good. It's been really stressful sometimes, and it's really deadline oriented, and like I can get really snippy because I'm super stressed out. Like I think what the first thing we're trying to do is build a really good office culture, which some things about it are great, you know, like some, you know, the kind of creativity we have and people being able to do what they want. And, you know, we're very much not top down driven. In other words, we're very much about cultivating each person as a designer. So in some ways we're very good. In other ways, like the long hours and the deadlines and all that stuff, like, you know, we're trying to work on that. And that's what the every other Friday off came from. So like, you know, I think the first thing we're trying to do is build a good office culture, meaning we're trying to make an equitable place for everyone. Again, we're very non-hierarchical. And so it's easier, I think, for us to do that. In terms of the greater good, I mean, you know, for us, it's like, we do try to be thoughtful. We try to be thoughtful across all things. And so, you know, we are in California anyway, which I'm not sure what kind of codes Michigan has, but we have maybe the most stringent, I believe, energy codes in the country. And then we do that better. So, and that's client driven actually, because it's expensive to do that. And your clients have to want it, but they do, which is really lucky for us. And I feel like just the whole idea of like economy of means, and doing, you know, making things not excessive is just part of our DNA anyway. And I feel like all that goes down, you know, that all drills down into a sustainability question. You know, everything has embodied energy, right? But the less of it that you use, the better off you're going to be. And so like, that's always just been kind of who we are. But, you know, we can do better. I mean, you know, I think everyone can do better. And then the other question is, yeah, most of the buildings we've been doing recently are LEED certified, LEED Gold, and sometimes even Platinum. And then there was a question on, to build on Rose's question, how can younger members of a firm that is more profit driven than speculative start to change that culture? Oh, that's a really good question. I'd love to hear from you guys what you think that, how to do that. Well, a lot of people here work, right? Even as students too. Like I teach at Berkeley, and not a big portion of our students work, which means they're not very efficient. Like when you start to work, you get way more efficient about your work. So I like it when we have students who do work, but I assume, I don't know about this about all firms, but, you know, I call everyone in, you know, I just call everyone individually too. Like now that we're in COVID and I don't see everyone, you know, I just want to do a check-in. How you doing? Blah, blah, blah. You know, do you have any thoughts? And we definitely do it annually, you know, for an annual review. It's really more about how they think about us more than how we think about them, to be honest. But now with COVID, you know, we try to do it more because we don't know about happy hours. Before happy hours is kind of the place where it's like, yeah, you know, it'd be really great if we had whatever, happy hour. Like we didn't even have happy hour before, you know, and we like had one once. Now we have them all the time, you know, so it's like, we're learning, we learn from the people who work with us. And I think you'd want to, anyone who's anywhere, working anywhere wants to be at a place where you feel like your employers want to learn from you too. And not always just the other way around. And then with things like quality of finishes, how do you explain to the contractor what you want to look at and review, and what you leave for them to figure out? I don't think you leave much just for them to figure out, like, unless you're doing something really standard, which they've done a million times. Like if we were putting in those acoustical drop ceilings or gypboard or whatever, like those things, you know, a contractor can do that well. Everything else needs a drawing or a sketch or a little baby model and a picture of it. And the renderings I showed you today, those all go into the construction documents. So a lot of the projects, like the one in Indiana, we have an executive architect, we have a local architect, CSO, and they're doing the construction documents. I mean, we review them and we work on the DD and we choose all the finishes and that kind of stuff. But we rely on really good partnerships with other architects. We rely on really good partnerships with furniture vendors. We rely on really good partnerships with lighting designers and with contractors. But we also can't step in where we're not wanted in a way. So because we work with executive architects, we're not in charge of the construction management process, you know, like they are. But I think one thing that we do that a lot of other design firms don't do is we still show up. We go on every weekly site walk, and we're there at every owner architect meeting, and we just insist on being there. I'm not gonna be able to do that in Indiana because it's in Indiana, or in China because it's in China. They're not even allowing Americans in, really. But but like for all the Pinterest projects and stuff locally, we are involved all the way through. Even if we're not getting that much of a fee for it, because all the stuff that happens on site, that need answers. And also we have really good executive architects, really good architects who are really collaborators. It's not like we don't ever have a handoff moment. It's not like, okay, we've done these drawings, now we're just going to hand it off to you and you take it and run with it. They're involved from the concept design too. So they know what the concept is and what we're looking for, and they're going to fight for it too. So, if it's not in the drawings and it's not crystal clear, then picking that stuff up in the field needs absolutely architect involvement for sure. Are you asking that more? Oh, that's what I was mentioning. I'll just finish that. So the renderings that we make, first of all, we start doing 3-dimensional work in concept design. Like sometimes I think, you get a, whatever, like, how you have the scope of work and it's like in schematic design, you're going to do this, and this is what you're going to do in design development, this is what you're going to do in construction documents. The way that normally works, I've noticed, is that like concept design is kind of like test fits and like floor plans and just like sketching, and then and some idea, and then schematic design is like fixing your floor plan and making sure you have coordinated with MEP to someone. I've noticed that the requirements for concept and schematic have gotten bigger and bigger. So your contractors and your clients want to see more in those early phases, and DD is more like double checking in a way, rather than like, okay, now we're going to really integrate structures and design development. No, like that happens like much earlier on, which I think is really good. But we work in 3D from the very beginning. We don't ever design in plan. Like this just like never happens. We always design in 3D and then we get a plan. But the 3D renderings that I showed today, including the animations, go into the construction document sets. They're there as reference. No one's building off of them. But if there's a question, it's something to refer to. And it helps people understand. Because let's face it, I look at construction documents all the time. And I still kind of have to sit there and go, okay, wait. So I have to like then reproject it back out in my mind to 3D again. And like there's a lot of room for interpretation there. And so the 3D is like so important, which leads to the next question, which is, are you finding more contractors are asking for your models with Revit files and construction drawings? Yes. So now we're doing more of our projects in Revit. We don't start in Revit, we'll start in Rhino, but then sometime towards the latter part of schematic design or DD, we translate it all to Revit. And then it's a Revit 360 model, and everyone's involved. Everyone has it. The consultants have it, the clients have it, the contractor has it, we have it, the executive architects have it. And we're all sharing one model. Oh, okay. I think I missed a question. Oh no, this is the lead question. Okay, does including sustainability design elements usually cost a lot more upfront? Not a lot more, but yes, it's definitely a premium. One of the things that we're finding is here in California, or everywhere really, but I don't know if you notice this about new buildings going up, but none of them are clear. They're all glass, but like you can't really see through the glass. Like, like they're dark or they're green or they're reflective or they're blah, blah, blah. And so we're spending a lot of time now with our projects trying to figure out how to have clear glass in buildings, which means you need a lot of shading. And so it's less, it is a sustainability solution, but it's not driven by sustainability. It's driven by wanting a building that has clear glass windows in it and not glass windows where you like look like a mirror, But it's not that we don't care about sustainability. It's just that we're doing it because we care about sustainability, but we're also doing it because we care about aesthetics. I don't really see those two things as separate, I guess.
That's a nice way to talk about it.
Yeah.
Lisa, I know that we have a big class that was joining us tonight, and I think they're they need to get to class.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you understand that too. It's so awesome to see the stuff that you guys are doing.
I know, Carl, it's great to see you.
It's so nice to see you.
Carl. That's so awesome.
We should get you when things, hopefully if things ever get back to normal, we should get you out here and continue this conversation.
I love the questions today. Those are really, really fun questions to answer. Provocative.
Yeah, and you're right. I think you get a sense from it too, that I think most of our students are working full time as they're certainly the grad students.
That's
and then
so great. That is so great.
They have class at night. So thank you so much. This was awesome, super inspiring. Checked all of the boxes that I talked about in terms of the introduction. Smart, witty, sustainable, great aesthetics, digital fabrication. It was all there. So say hi to Craig for me. Say hi to Tom for me. And hopefully we can intersect soon.
Let me know if you come out to San Francisco.
I will.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much,
Good night,
guys.
everybody. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Bye.